the outside voice. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to your 9 o'clock panel, the second of our 4 panel session this morning. My name is George Boyagis with Cresa, but I'm also with FEI, as many of you know, VP of Membership. So if you haven't joined FEI, or if you know someone who might be interested, please reach out. I'm happy to talk about the benefits of membership in FEI. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator this morning, Jim Vos, my colleague, who we've assembled a remarkable panel for you. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Those of you who, let me ask you a question. How many of you saw the quick sort of TikTok type video that we did about Jim and Sue, Fun with Labor Analytics? Okay, we've got a couple people who saw that. If you haven't seen it, you know, we had a lot of fun pulling that together. So
that's evidence that FEI's social media strategy needs work. No.
Jim, take it away. Thanks.
Well,
How come you're not wearing a bow tie again?
So I walked into, I said to Roseanne this morning, I haven't worn a suit in a long time. I haven't worn a bow tie since maybe COVID. I put the suit on and there was a bow tie in my pocket. So if anybody needs me to wear a bow tie, I have one with me. It's been that long. I think I still remember the tie. Yeah, I am dressed even though I'm not wearing a bow tie. But thank you for that. The quick TikTok video was really a replay of a call that was a conversation between Sue and I. We keep hearing about labor analytics and how that's shifting the real estate conversation. And I think that 10 years ago, if you had asked Cresa or any real estate company to come and talk, you'd have expected a conversation about where are the rents and where is the vacancy rate and what's happening in the market. And it would have been a very data-driven conversation around numbers. Today, I think that's a different conversation. I said, Sue, we keep hearing about labor analytics. And so I asked her on this silly little video, what are people talking about? Sue, what are we talking about when we talk about labor analytics?
We are talking about the location, availability, and cost of labor.
Pretty simple. Location, availability, and
Availability,
cost.
quality, and cost of labor.
Okay. And so as we think about that driving real estate decisions, today we want to talk about, following on this conversation of talent, how we think about labor, but then help you see that today, and there aren't any landlords in the room, right? For most of our clients, and most of you know Cresa, we only represent corporate users of space, so we're not investors, we're not landlords. For most of our clients, rent is not the conversation anymore. As I say, 10 years ago it was about what's the rent in this building. I don't think that's the driver anymore. It's how well this space lets our organization be who we aspire to be. So we find ourselves in the business of wrapping real estate solutions around business problems. The business problem used to be a finance issue. No offense to the finance folks in the room, but I think the conversation's changing. So we wanted to do that translation with you today. So I'm excited that we have the 3 panelists. Let me ask them to introduce themselves quickly and then we'll dive in. Can you give us name, company, and just for a fun fact, what's the first post-COVID vacation you want to take? Meg, you want to start out?
Sure. So good morning, Meg Pichelle. I'm a partner with EY, filling in for Michael Leary. A little different.
We have to put the wrong name on the screen. Sorry.
Yes. And my post-COVID trip that I want to take, Turks and Caicos. Would be pretty amazing.
Good call.
I'm Toby Dayton, CEO of LinkUp. We are a recruitment, advertising, and labor market data company. And a COVID trip, probably maybe mid-COVID. My middle son is over in England studying music, so I'll probably at some point, hopefully post-COVID, go see him.
I'm Sue Grimm with Cresa. I'm a principal and have been with the company for 24 years. My dream vacation, I want to go to Hawaii and I want to have a luau.
I don't even want COVID to be over for that. I just want to go. I get it. Well, so Toby, let's ask you to start out. You should talk a little bit about LinkUp and the research job, the company that you have, the research that you guys do. But the reason that we invited you was a blog post I think you had about a month ago where you said there is not a labor shortage. Virtually every one of our clients would say that's not true. You're nuts. There's an enormous labor shortage. Can you tell us about your organization and parse out this conversation of what is the labor shortage discussion and why you think that's not right.
Yeah, so just as a little bit of background, so at LinkUp, what we do, and the company's been around for 20 years in the talent acquisition space, and about 15 years ago, we started to index jobs, scrape jobs directly from company websites. So we go out globally every day, and we're indexing jobs directly from company websites. So we have a global database, about 180 million job records going back almost 15 years now. And so we use that data to get real-time insights into what's going on in the labor market, new job postings, sector, location, industries, company, and then we package that into a range of data products for our clients, corporate clients, investors, financial asset management firms, different companies that are able to use and benefit from that data. So we've got some very, very significant real-time insights into what's going on in the labor market, and we again, it is updated, it's accurate, so it's quite unique in that respect. We're in this category, this emerging category called alternative data, which is becoming a very significant industry in and around capital markets first, but it's extending into corporations. So we've been in COVID, obviously been very, very interested in what's happening. It's obviously been a seismic event in the labor force globally and certainly in the U.S. And what we've seen really in this year is the economy is starting to roar back very quickly. There's a lot of talk, obviously, about unemployment and labor shortages and inflation and things obviously everyone in the room is very familiar with. Our view is, in fact, that there really is not a labor shortage at all. If you look at the data coming out of the BLS, there are about 18 million unemployed people in the country. They're either unemployed, underemployed, or they're not counted as unemployed because they haven't been actively looking for work in the past 4 weeks. On top of that, you have record number of quits, this great resignation. 4 million plus people are quitting on a monthly basis, so there's massive churn. So there is really no shortage of workers. There's no supply issue. Conversely, too, there's just enormous demand. So you've got a huge amount of supply and a huge amount of demand. And our view is that really what is happening is that there's this massive bid-ask spread going on between employers and employees, and that they are really, there's just this bid-ask spread is just this really enormous chasm. Obviously COVID related, but there are a lot of other factors that we can maybe come into some detail. Some of the things were covered on the earlier panel. There's this massive bid-ask spread that has essentially frozen up the job market, and it is leading to disappointing jobs numbers and certainly a lot of challenges for companies trying to fill positions, supply chain, wage inflation, inflation in general. There's just this massive disruption going on. But again, our view is that over time, that bid-ask spread will resolve itself in a lot of different ways. Eventually, there will be some equilibrium, but we are a long way from it today, and it's causing a lot of challenges, certainly as the economy is trying to recover and the country is trying to sort of get back to this post-COVID world.
So Meg, you can talk for a second here about your role at EY, and then I'd be curious, the companies that you are working with, how people would respond to there is no labor shortage, and then maybe specifically some examples of what you're seeing companies do.
Yes, so thank you. And at EY, I consult around all things talent. And work with a lot of organizations right now on this how are we addressing this new way of working? What does this mean in terms of, talent that we have working from home, creating community, training, learning, and have also lived a number of transitions into new office spaces. So in my prior role, I was a market leader for another professional services firm where we consolidated 3 offices into 1, and then now at EY, was part of the team that supported our launch of the new space at Dayton's. So happy to talk about those experiences as well. And most of my clients are saying there's a talent shortage and a labor shortage. And really, we're saying it's a skills shortage. So if we're really specific about it, it's not that the talent isn't there. It's the talent equipped to do the jobs that are open right now are missing. So a lot of our conversations are around how are we supporting recruiting differently in the talent acquisition process? What are we doing to help equip employees when they come in the door so that they can take on a different role that they might not have been trained for initially? And then also, how do we support the change for everyone that's currently working in organizations? So there is a lot of retention challenge right now, and one of the pieces that we're seeing around that's contributing to that is just jobs have changed pretty dramatically, expectations have changed pretty dramatically, and employees are exhausted and going through this change fatigue pretty consistently across industries. So other pieces that clients are doing really well, and something we're seeing is revisiting what their value proposition is and enticing employees to come in and keeping the employees that they have. So how are we supporting employees through this transition? What are we doing in terms of not just upskilling, but also well-being, supporting the mental health crisis that we're going through at this time, as well as employees and just the work challenges with children not having the care that they need and schools getting canceled still. This long pandemic we're working through, trying to accommodate and support their employees in that way as well.
So talk for a second about the kind of portfolio of clients that you tend to serve for Cresa, and then maybe some of the things that you're watching companies do to respond to the concerns that Mike's raised here.
Yeah, so what I'm referring to very large companies. So how they are dealing with the pandemic has, I would say, over the last 20 months, changed on a monthly basis, and will continue to change on a monthly basis because we don't know where we're at, we don't know where we're going to end up. So for anybody out there that's wondering what you're going to do in the future, the answer is you're just going to have to be able to change, because nobody knows exactly what's going to happen in the future of, specifically office work environments. What we're seeing with the larger companies is they are kind of categorizing their employees into 3 different buckets. You have your full-time in-person, so critical functions, manufacturing, R&D, that's R&D work that's associated with manufacturing for the life of the company, the culture of the company, the innovation of the company. You're seeing 100% work from home, meaning it's not a job that necessarily needs to be in the office, and has shown it can be productive not being in the office. And then you have hybrid, and hybrid is probably the one that is the most challenging, because you need those people in the office for your company culture and to promote that company culture. But they don't necessarily want to come into the office as much as you want them to come into the office. And so there's this challenge of, do they come in 1 day, 2 day, 3 day a week? Do they want to come in 1 day, 2 day, 3 day a week? We have a labor challenge. If I make them come in 1 or 2 days a week and I even sell the company culture, are they going to leave? So when I started the conversation with, it's going to continue to change, it's going to continue to change. No matter what we plan for today, a large company we're working for, they have brought some of their employees back, and they thought that they had a commitment from the hybrid teams to come in 2 or 3 days a week. They're not seeing it yet. Now, I will say the Delta variant ramped up during that same time period, so that could be a result of that. But now we have, what do they call it, Omicron, sorry. So now that's happening. So that's going to change things again.
So you've talked a couple times about flexibility and just knowing that things are changing. I was teasing Dave between the break here, when we talk about people first, it's interesting to me. I mean, intellectually I get that, but there are times I go, just give me a real example. Like, what is somebody doing? When you talk about flexibility and this hybrid model where we have to offer flexibility, really specifically, what are some of your big company clients doing to create flexibility in the workplace? How does that just take shape?
Well, they're creating an environment where teams can get together. So sometimes that's changing their office space to create more conference rooms, to create like a coffee, soft seating area, just encouraging that team effort. Bring your team in once or twice a week to get together, to that innovation, that idea, that culture are, trying to, and they're trying it. I'm not sure that they believe that that is the full answer, but once again, it's going to change, and it really depends on the employees.
Meg, are there companies that you are talking to that are doing this flexible thing well? Are there some stories you can tell there? Any examples that come to mind?
Sure, yeah. So on the hybrid front, I think there this intentionality around what do we want, how do we want to use the space that we have? So I've seen a shift in conversations. We went from, we're going to be back in the office in June, and then it was September, and now it's January, and now it'll probably be bumped out a little bit later. And so instead of these target dates, thinking about we're going to be in the office to have this training session or having this mentoring time. We have a client that has leaders that are working directly with teams to create kind of physical trainings and meetings that have a really specific development need that is tied to a virtual component as well. So it's not, some of it's around learning and development that's going really well. Some of it's around specific project work and initiatives. And then some of it is balancing the haves and have-nots too. So there are clients, my manufacturing clients that I work with, have a real concern with, we have people who need to go into the plants and be on the floor, and then we have corporate that gets to stay at home. And so how do we balance that dynamic and that commitment to our essential workers to show, we're here and supporting you as well. So some of it's around culture, and I think the organizations that are doing it best are thinking about culture not as necessarily we need to be in the space for our culture, but we need to think about the behaviors that inform our culture and how we use physical space, time together to reinforce those activities.
Yeah, and I would say my portfolio of clients tends to be smaller companies, where Sue tends to work with some of our large company clients. And that behavior conversation is the first place we started. And John, you mentioned this with the Centero space conversation. It's what is it that the leaders really want to get out of the experience in the office? How does the space physically contribute to that? One of our clients has said their new policy is 3 days a week, including Wednesday. And that means that on Wednesday, every employee is there, which means they can't give up square footage. But now they're starting to wonder if they need to change the way they use their square footage. So is it more the coffee and soft seating as opposed to private office spaces? And so that reshuffling of physical space is, as I say, it's the real estate solution wrapped around the business problem. That becomes the last chapter in the book, not the first chapter. So, and we're watching small companies wrestle with that. Toby, you guys have had that conversation in your organization. You want to talk a little bit about what you've been kind of wrestling with in your space?
Yeah, we're in some ways fortunate. We're under 100 people in our company, so in some ways it has been, and we've always been very flex-oriented, very accommodating to individual work schedules, preferences, commute times. We have all kinds of different, we're very open to letting people determine when and where and how they want to work. And so that's always been part of our culture, part of our philosophy. But even despite that, COVID has been a dramatic change, and we're still, as everybody is, trying to figure out how do you maintain that culture in this kind of environment with most people remote still fully. We do have people remote all around the country, so we've had a percentage of our workforce that has been permanently remote. But again, it's been an adjustment through this process. We're in the warehouse district in a very open office space. And we have very much gone back into trying to figure out sort of when and where and how we're going to come back. We certainly are going to have a hybrid solution and let people too, if they choose to be remote full time, if that works for them and the teams that they're on. But it is a challenge, and we're still trying to figure out what is this going to look like 2-3 years from now, and how is that going to impact what we need from a space standpoint.
Toby, of the companies that you're surveying, are there industry groups that are starting to figure out this hybrid thing better than others in that 4 million people that are quitting every month. They're going someplace. Who are the winners? How do they approach this differently? Anything that your data shows you?
Yeah, I think from our standpoint, one of the things that we track is some of the language and changes in job openings, job descriptions. So we can see, we actually look at the job openings nationally and start looking for, we can do all kinds of work around NLP and machine learning and sort of figure out signals around what companies are doing. And so we have seen not surprisingly, a huge increase, about a 6x increase in companies that are offering remote jobs. So it's now up at about 10% of the job openings nationwide have remote. We expect that to continue to go up as companies figure this out.
Sorry, you said 10%?
So 10% of all job openings now
are remote.
So there is, and it's up from about 1.5% a couple of years ago. So, and expectations are, when you look at surveys of employees, it's about a 20 to 30% of people say they want some or all remote options. So we expect that, again, as we think about when and where that equilibrium is going to occur, that is one of the factors I think that's going to allow that equilibrium to be met. From a sector standpoint, it is that maybe the two bookends that we've seen are, on one side, technology companies, particularly Silicon Valley, but tech-oriented companies have, very similar to ours, always had a flexible environment, very much of a culture around remote work and flex and those kinds of things. I think they've adapted very, very well and responded very aggressively and quickly to this new environment. On the other side, one of the things and one of the big areas, client segments that we serve is Wall Street firms, asset management firms, the financial industry, capital markets, and so we're paying very close attention to what's going on in that sector. And I think they're trying to figure out, they were some of the first to say, must be back, we need everybody in the office, and there have been some challenges that those companies have really run into some pretty significant obstacles trying to get everybody back, and they're rethinking what that is going to look like and are adjusting. So it's an interesting sort of bookend, and then everything in between. It's really interesting to watch on a sector basis.
Yeah, some conversation earlier about kind of the disconnect between in a manufacturing environment where everybody has to be on the floor to do their job, and then in the administrative office in the same company, people don't have to be on the floor to do their job. We've got a couple of clients that are in that manufacturing space and wrestling with what is the we, they that happens. I saw an article yesterday, I was just mentioning this to Toby, that the rapid decline in people who are taking interest in physical labor, manual labor type jobs is becoming really pronounced. In the real estate world, maybe this is our odd lens, and we all know that construction costs and construction labor particularly have been skyrocketing. We just have fewer contractors and electricians and plumbers choosing this as a career field. If you own a building or you occupy a building, there are some maintenance guys who are fixing the boiler and managing stuff inside your building. If you look at all of those trades, the building maintenance and building construction trades, that labor pool right now has an average age 10 years above the national average age for the labor pool. So just a profound shortage looming of skilled tradespeople. And part of it is that the media says, hey, I want to work remote. And everybody goes, I'd love to work remote. It's really hard to turn the wrench on the boiler working remote. So nobody's choosing those jobs. And so I think it's interesting as we wonder kind of culturally, I mean, at a national level, how we honor physical labor and physical work and hands-on skills. We treasure artists. We don't treasure mechanics. We need them both, right? So it's an interesting challenge to me. Yeah,
it's one of the long-term demographic trends that has been talked about is the retiring baby boomers, and that is obviously a huge trend that is affecting the workforce, and one that people have been watching for at least a decade, if not longer. And as someone said on the earlier panel, I think COVID accelerated that. You've seen an increase in retirements, and that is hitting those kinds of demographics and sectors and those jobs quite aggressively as those people are. There was a good article in Star Tribune, I think it was last week, on butchers, and the same exact phenomena is going on. They're just people literally, there just are not literally enough butchers, and they're all going to be retiring if, so there are going to be some pretty significant dislocations, I think, have been and will continue.
Yeah. So what was the old country song, Mama, don't let your babies grow up to be cowboys? Maybe we actually do need them to be, mechanics and not just lawyers and doctors and stuff. Anyhow, so one of the consequences of this, though, is sort of changing, and I've noticed this too, and I had a conversation about this even within our own office. I miss hanging out with Brendan, who's one of our newer employees, or Elijah, or Mitch, or some of the younger staff, in part because one of the roles that I think I have as a leader in the organization is to be a mentor, and it's hard for me to mentor by Zoom. Meg, I think about the accounting industry as having really fundamentally been built on sort of an apprenticeship model. As you guys start to struggle with hybrid and some people in and some people out, how does apprenticeship happen? How is your industry changing organizationally around this?
Yeah, so it's interesting. We have taken, because there isn't this continuity of being in the space with someone, Monday through Friday, popping in, asking questions. So you lose those spontaneous moments of either seeing someone and thinking, oh, I need to talk to you about this, and also looking to someone for guidance and direction in your career earlier on. So EY actually just launched a mentor match technology that we're using. So we're taking an approach of using I haven't used a dating site, but like a dating site where you use a matchup where you say, like, here's what I'm looking for in a mentor, and I've heard from others, and here's what here's what I could offer to a mentee. And we're also doing reverse mentoring. So we're trying to fill the gap of, since we don't have those moments that just happen because you're in the physical space, how do we take advantage of the virtual space for building these other relationships and this guidance that might not have happened initially? We also, when we think about it, have now employees that have joined our firm straight out of school that have never really been in an office. And so this idea of development and support and connection for those individuals on teams. And then when we look at the office, it's also been fascinating to see, because we were in an old space at the beginning of the pandemic, traditional office space, everyone had their own office or cube, and there were a few people going into the office, mostly our more experienced hires or our newer hires. Now that we have this open space at Dayton's, it is creating this question of how do we use this space and how do we come together to support more of that community again and that development. So it's evolving, and it's evolving as we think about our clients as well, because there are plenty of clients who are still just fine meeting on Zoom, and a lot of the connections would happen on client sites too, because you'd have a larger team together working alongside a client. So I appreciate the perspective that it's harder to mentor on Zoom, but we have to do that, and we have to develop virtually a little bit more, because we still have this gap of space together working side by side physically that I think is going to be a while, because most of our clients, well, we're ready and anxious to start that, our clients aren't yet.
Our accounting firm, and over the summer I was visiting with one of the partners, and he said, I'm a little worried when we get audited because half my staff asked me half as many questions this spring when we were doing everybody's returns. Because I don't know if they were smarter or if we made mistakes we don't know about. And I think that's the anxiety around this mentoring. It's just like we don't know what mistakes might not have been asked about. So I think it'll be interesting to watch some of that unfold. Hopefully they don't get audited. Meg, we're going to come back and ask you to tell us more of the story about the new UI space. I think it's an interesting example. But Sue, before we get to that, we've been watching some clients change space. I just did a project for a client, and one of the physical changes they made was that if you think about a conference room, we've always thought about them as rectangular, and the most important seats are at the head or the foot of the table. This client has said that going forward, every conference room is built around 2 monitors on the wall, one for the data and one for the faces of the people who aren't in the room. So that rectangular room just shifted 90 degrees in terms of orientation, and probably should be deeper and closer to square with a half-round table so everybody can see each other and the screen. So just a fundamental change in the way we think about a physical space. Sue, you have a large client who's doing a new headquarters. Are there some things that you're seeing in that project or others that are just sort of physical real estate changes that we're seeing as a result of some of these different work styles?
Yeah, so I agree with you, Jim. A lot of the video technology took a much higher place in the whole development process and how do you lay out the space. A lot more conference rooms. Those conference rooms are much larger. They have a reservation system. So if you want to reserve a room, you go into the reservation system and you reserve it for these amount of hours online, and then when you get into work, that room actually knows who's going to be in the room. So from an IT perspective, you know, there's all this smart technology. So you're kind of getting a theme here that the physical space is being driven by something else besides a person in a cube or a person in the office. Other physical changes, very, very, very few offices and no dedicated space, meaning no one has an office that they go to every day that they can hang their picture in and no one else uses it. They just said everything is going to have an address and you reserve it through the reservation system. The other thing that they did were very intentionally, and we'll call these games and activities. They have a yoga studio, they have a yoga outside, they have bike racks, game rooms with ping pong, with pool tables. And it isn't just that they're there, go use them, they encourage people to use them. It's one of the major things that they're doing to promote culture and promote that interpersonal communication that is missing right now, the spontaneous conversations. They're encouraging people to go play ping pong or go play, do their yoga and talk, because that's what we're missing. And they feel like the innovation that they normally were getting from those conversations, they are trying to create situations where those conversations are going to happen. And leadership needs to be very intentional to promote that and say, this is what we want you to do because we want you to have these conversations that are not happening on a Zoom call.
Yeah, one of our clients last summer said it's impossible to schedule spontaneity. Right. And so, the strategy conversation earlier about the strategy is around innovation, not about productivity, right? And so how do you create innovation? Proximity, I think, was your answer, right, John? And so it's just, we're watching some of that change. So Meg, let's come back to you. I mean, in terms of a real physical space conversation, I know that EY started your real estate search pre-COVID, but you made a lot of the decisions in the midst of COVID. So do you want to talk about just the kind of profound shift you guys have gone through in the last 24 months?
Sure.
In the last 4 weeks, really.
Right, yeah. So it was the move to the office space was what has been happening, I think, a lot in professional services, which was less dedicated space pre-COVID. How do we get more efficient with our footprint and fewer, there weren't going to be dedicated offices. So some of those decisions were already made. And then with the pandemic, there was a question of, okay, what does this change in terms of what space we need? And thankfully, a lot of it was affirming. So it was interesting as you were describing what you're seeing in office spaces. That is really what we've rolled out with the Dayton Center. So there's a boxing ring, there's a gym, there's a roof, there's a bar. So there are all of these amenities around the office itself that our employees get to take advantage of. And then within the space, the technology is critical because employees were saying when we were in our old office space, I don't want to go to the office because I have more monitors at home than if I'm here. Like the technology needs to be as good as, if not better, in the new space to make that work. So the technology, in fact, there's 3 terms that we use and that we built on in moving to the new space. So it's what are the behaviors that we need from our teams, and I think that is really critical. So high performing teams is a framework that we use at EY, we use with our clients too. So really getting to what does teaming look like, what do we commit to at different levels as members of a team, how do we work in this hybrid environment, because now that we've moved into this space, there will still be some employees that are working at home that day that aren't there. How do we make that happen? Then there's the bites, we're calling for the technology. So how do we leverage the screens in our conference room, manage having people in person versus virtually? And then there's the bricks, which is who's physically in the space. And so the other piece that changed a bit was modeling. So we developed personas to get to what's the right amount of space, what are expectations. So we haven't come out with a firm requirement that you know 3 days a week, including Wednesday, like the one example you shared, but some guidance on, you know, based on your role, when should you expect to be in, and how should you try and use the space and encourage some of the collaboration, teaming, and innovation. So we've got, we call them flexible flyers. So those are kind of our, in the old world, those would have been road warriors. So people who are almost always out of the market, working with clients in other cities, locations, not in the office as often, so you don't expect to see them. Orbiters, so those are you know, employees that work with clients but might be in and out of the office within the day. Then there's anchors. So those are the folks that are primarily in the office, given their role, and appreciate being in the space. And then there's fully remote. And even fully remote, though we're saying is not 100%, that's 80%. And this is consistent across all of our offices nationally. So it's something that we leveraged in the Twin Cities, but we agreed on nationally, so that as we're working with teams across offices, it's similar expectations too, and how we use the space and who is in the space. What was fascinating, so we opened the new space a few weeks ago, and so I have, I'll share, my colleague Chris and I are very different, and I'm generally a little more optimistic than Chris, and when we both went into the office, he was really frustrated. He's like, well, I could have done this from home. I just was on my screen all day. I was in meetings. Like, this was a waste of my time. I was like, well, sounds like you didn't plan very well, because I got to meet, and then I listed, like, here are the meetings I had. I went for a walk while I had a meeting in the Skyway, like, got a coffee during the day that I didn't have to make myself. Like, this was an awesome day. So it is that intentionality on what are you doing when you're in the space to make it worthwhile. Because you're right, if I had had a typical day that's back-to-back meetings on my screen, I would have been just as frustrated. But needing to think about, okay, when am I going to be in the office and how do I take advantage of that? Not just, I need to be in the office on this day. So those are a few of the insights.
Are you seeing different populations show up? I mean, does people choose when they can come in? What are you seeing in terms of, maybe it's too soon? But.
Yeah, it's a little too soon. There's a lot of enthusiasm from our employees earlier in their career because of the location and because of the space. You know, there's a lot of great amenities. It's also interesting, another kind of change that we anticipated but need to come back to is not having dedicated office space. So there are folks who came in and said, wait, I have to sit here? Like, where are my four walls? And so a little bit of discomfort with not having, you know, a dedicated space to go to. So that'll be interesting to see how we move through that change for folks who really, while the other office was dated and didn't have the amenities, it did have, you know, I close the door in my space, I know where I'm going every day. So that's going to be an adjustment for our more experienced employees.
Yeah, interesting. When we were talking with Michael Leary setting this up, he commented that he thought that the senior partners were most likely to come in because they've spent the first 30 years of their career coming in. And that the youngest members of your staff are most likely to come in because they can't wait to get out of their 600 square foot apartment. So, you know, that it was kind of the bookends of your labor pool. And,
right.
And that was sort of an anticipation. So we'll see if that bears out. But Sue's heard me tell the story. We had a client a couple of years ago who was about to make a lease decision when COVID hit. And it was a 100,000 square feet, large organization, lots of employees. And nobody came in, and he, 60 days later, he said, we have always, as an organization, aspired to be on the best places to work list. Nobody's dining room table is their best place to work. So he said, while everybody's gone, let's double down. Let's drop $10 million to renovate the space. Let's sign a new 10-year lease so that when we're ready to turn the lights on, this is the coolest place to come back. Upgraded everybody's furniture, all new technology, just made a huge spend because he believed that in the office was the best place to work. Again, what's interesting to me in that conversation, and it was touched on earlier, I think the old world, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, there were 4, 5, 6 different models of what office space would look like. There were relatively few choices. That box of Crayola crayons with 8 colors is about all we needed for the architect's block to do design work for our offices. Today, that 128 box isn't big enough. I think there's so many different variations on how we will use space. Every company will be doing it differently. The mass customization that was talked about earlier, I think that we're going to watch this evolve pretty quickly and pretty broadly. Sue, I'm going to ask you to close, and then we'll do some audience Q&A. You had a client that almost made a horrible decision, and so this takes us back to labor analytics about expansion. I wonder if you want to tell that story quickly, just as a story again where labor ultimately drove a real estate decision.
Right. It was a mid-sized manufacturing company, and they wanted to expand the building by buying the site next door. And so we were their real estate provider. They said, Sue, can you come out here, give us some numbers on what it's going to cost to build the building, see if you can negotiate this land. It sounded like a great solution. We asked them to take a step back while we were dual pathing, trying to acquire that land. We did some labor analytics and strategic planning. And what the labor analytics was we took their national job codes and we figured out in the Twin Cities, where is the labor? Because labor, no matter what they were going to do, labor was going to drive where they should be. And we figured out really quick that where they were going to expand that building, they weren't going to have enough labor. There wasn't the amount of money they could spend to bring people there. They were not going to have the labor. They actually ended up being on a completely opposite side of the Twin Cities, which I can tell you today we found them an existing building, because to build the building, as you talk about construction costs going up, at that time lead times were extensive on steel, and so they said they wanted to be in within a certain amount of time, and we figured out not only was it going to cost more to build on this, expand on the site, they were going to be 6 months behind where they needed to be, and every month was millions of dollars in revenue lost. So not only were they not going to have the labor, it was going to cost more, they were going to miss their timing. The labor analytics drove the location, and it ended up, I can tell you today, it was an awesome decision. Even today, they don't have labor issues at that site. We got them in 3 months ahead of time. It cost less, much, much less, and they don't have labor issues. So, what I do, my encouragement would be, and I can tell you today, we are doing more labor analytics studies for our customers than anything else when it comes to driving location for real estate. Because if you don't have the people to fill the jobs, nothing's going to get done, and you're going to lose revenue. So that's
So I said 10 years ago, you'd asked us for numbers and statistics. So let me give you 2 shocking statistics, and then we'll take some questions. As long as I've been in the business, and I've been here 32 years as of last week, at Cresa, when vacancy has gone up, rents have gone down. This is a simple supply and demand curve. This year, vacancies are up in Minneapolis significantly. Rents are up. Duh. Here's what's happening. Everybody wants the best buildings. And so even if you're downsizing your square footage, you're willing to spend to go to a Dayton's building because it has awesome fitness and a rooftop bar and all of these amenities. Everybody wants the best buildings. And so there's still strong competition for the premium quality assets. And nobody wants what nobody wants. You can't give away Class C space. On the industrial side, there's enormous demand, and so industrial is crazy and prices are going through the roof. But in the office market, the historical correlation between rent and vacancy is gone. So the best space, everybody wants what everybody wants. Rents are going up in the spaces that will let you attract the talent you want. Talent is driving rent. People don't care what space costs. All right, that was my real estate update. What kind of questions can the panelists answer for you? John?
Disclaimer up front on my question, I'm probably oversimplifying, but obviously there's a lot of type of benefits from working from home with regards to limited flexibility is created for the money I've saved because I don't have to commute. I don't have the stress of the commute, and. At the same time, it seems like mental health issues are at an all-time high. There's a lot of press around it. 6 months ago, I think the daycare dynamic would have been an element of that. The stresses at home, not on from the pandemic. Kids being back in school, that one I think is starting to sort itself out. Why are labor analytics, or are they trying to correlate, or why are we not seeing a correlation of work from home benefits to why is mental health going in the opposite direction?
I mean, I'll jump in. I think there are a lot of factors on the mental health issue. Remote work is one of them. I think there, and work in general, COVID, everything else, the struggles, the challenges are unprecedented in anyone's lifetime. So I think that is a huge overlay. But beyond that, I think they're just the environment we're in today. I would argue that just from a societal standpoint, stress levels have never been higher. The circumstances, politics, climate change, generational, income issues, childcare, all of these factors, student debt. You look at what, and the younger generations too, and the amount of debt levels, the dislocation, disruption, and frankly, borderline chaos of what we're going through globally, nationally, locally is, and certainly in the Twin Cities, with what, on top of everything else, with all the social unrest we've seen and racial issues in the Twin Cities, it just is, it's unprecedented. So I don't think necessarily that there's any one thing that is sort of the driver of that. It's just this confluence of factors that I think are creating unbelievable levels. And you see it all the way down. There was, I read an article the other day about, again, locally, I can't remember what school district it was, but the amount of kids that are coming in for, to see the specialists in their school around mental health issues, unprecedented in what they're seeing. So it is literally top to bottom, I think, across essentially every facet of society.
And I think two interesting responses from employers. One is just around well-being support and what that looks like in the workplace. So how are managers being supported and having conversations that managers used to never even attempt in the past? How are benefits being offered in terms of counseling, support for families, alternative support to deal with, there's still the quarantine requirements for kids and all of those challenges that employees are juggling. And then I think too, on the kind of perspective as employers, a fascinating insight, there's so much disinformation and just stress with news too. As you were going through the list, I was feeling my stress level go up, and then I think about what I read this morning, right?
We'll have Prozac at the break.
But employees shared that they really trust their employers. That's a fascinating change in the last few years. So they're looking to leaders of their organizations for direction, guidance, support across a number of areas that is a greater burden, but also an incredible benefit when you think of engaging and attracting talent during this really challenging time.
Do you think that's a factor of the type of environment you're working in? Because having been in the public accounting side, those are the younger people are the ones who need those connections and probably going to have the most problems as they start raising families and that sort of stuff. And if the employer's not there, who is there is the issue I've seen.
Yeah, that it could be, and I'd be curious, in what you both are seeing and working with other organizations. I am seeing it more broadly in that, new parents. Like, how do I handle, growing in my career when I also have a child that I suddenly need to care for? Parents of older children where you're dealing with mental health crises. Like, there are all of these vulnerabilities that never would come into work, but part of because we're working from home, and then also just part of the reality that I can't deal and I don't know where else to turn, I think is creating more of this openness and this trust that hasn't been in the corporate space before.
Well, and where I will start it out with communication. Communication from the leaders in the company on a consistent basis, more so probably 4 times more than you did before, because everyone is remote. And in the absence of that communication, they're going to come up with their own thing. And so it's I've seen some companies, it's almost daily communication on everything from diversity, inclusion to, hitting the hard issues of mental health issues to lines that you can call, even to report if you believe a coworker is having a mental health crisis. It's much more transparent and open, and the companies that don't put out those communications, their employees are going to come up with their own stuff. I mean, it's just, and most of that is not good. So I would encourage you all to communicate, even if the communication changes, which it has evolved 50 different times in the last 20 months. But continue to communicate the company. And I think that, the larger companies get it and do it, and I think that's why you're seeing the employees feel more entrenched in the company, because they feel like they're part of the solution and they're part, they do have that community. But I'm also, the companies that promote culture and promote teaming and promote areas where we can come together, those are going to be the companies that are the most successful in retaining employees.
Well, I think we've got time for one more question, but before we call for that, Ned, I'm a former CPA. There's a lot of current practicing CPAs, former CPAs in the room, that kind of thing. The boxing ring. I can imagine, technical issues, between this partner and that partner, or the tax guy and the audit gal, or something like that. A new way of resolving those sorts of issues. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. I have to tell you, that's the only place I've heard of that has a boxing ring as an amenity currently. So we'll see if that happens in the future. One last question from the audience.
What's going to happen with the co-working space is everybody starts to try to talk over each other, or find the deafening silence with 20 people in the co-working space, and then somebody takes a phone call about their personal challenges with their kids or something else. How's this going to play out? Because I've seen it play out ugly.
Well, we went, when we moved into our space about 5+ years ago, we had an very much of an open environment, and what we found is that people, those kinds of issues definitely have to work through that from a company standpoint, culturally, but in terms of, the personal issues, we create spaces where people can go for personal calls, whatever they do. We've got a wide variety of different kinds of places in and around the office where they essentially can find a space for whatever is going on for them at that moment.
Yeah, I was just going to add, at my prior employer, when we moved to an open work environment, we put in these soundproof phone booths, and I thought they were like, no one's going to use those. They're just looked odd to begin with, even. And then I found myself going, when there was a personal call or a difficult client call, just there were a lot of different spaces you could go into, and even those little booths were awesome. And people knew that there was probably something bigger going on when you went in and came out, but there wasn't any, it felt like the privacy was still there.
We've watched clients kind of adjust furniture systems. Higher walls give the perception of privacy because I can't see anybody, and I talk louder, which makes me more disruptive. So actually lower walls were resulting in lower voices, but too low meant it was total chaos. So there's a fine line in that, and I think that it just depends a little bit on the environment. And then you have good quality headphones and microphones for everybody, or not, right? And so so some of it's the technology and some of it's just acoustics. And then ceiling treatments. I mean, there's a lot of design stuff that you can play with.
Or the boxing ring.
Or you
Or
can
the boxing
pick it up.
Please join me in thanking our panel today. Thank you very much.